Awesome.
All right, we're at the top
All
of the
right,
hour.
let's go.
I want to thank everybody for coming. We're doing our BioSec, protecting biotech innovations in the digital age. Really want to jump in, and some of the topics we're going to be talking about. And just to back up a little bit, I want to let everybody know that we're going to continuously be doing different conversations. I first said conversation or webinars, conversations on different operational functions within business. Talk about different verticals. Right now, we're talking about biosec, but I want to pull everybody away that this is not just solely about security. This is about operations and how companies function. And our conversation meant to pull in the C-levels. We're not trying to make this a technical conversation. We're trying to make this a business conversation and not make this a security conversation, but a risk conversation. What is your risk tolerance? What's your risk management? What is your business about? Because your business is about growing, expanding, and mitigating any risk your business may have for failing. And that's truly what you want to look at. And I know it's still security, but want to understand that it's about your business and the risk around it and what you can tolerate and how to mitigate some of the things that may affect your business as well as your cash flow if you're not doing the right things. And we're going to go a little deeper into it. But I wanted to jump in and let me find my clicker so I can click. Okay, we're going to be going through some of the top questions. And these things we kind of went through and polled and spoke to people and well as looked at what's the trending conversations. And we picked the top 5. And we're going to be going with other topics beyond this, but we're going to be hitting on how the nature and frequency of cyber attacks has evolved for biotech and pharma. I know it says 2019, we're heading to 2024. We want to see the trend for that time frame. How the risks, I mentioned risk again, is affecting the intellectual property, because that's key and paramount to allow these pharma and these companies in the healthcare. They create content, how they can protect that intellectual property that they've created. Why have ransomware and malware attacks, particularly targeting clinical research and R&D, because they're now becoming a big target. They have a big red mark on their back, and these nefarious actors are looking at these as low-hanging fruit and going after them. How's the rapid acceleration of digital transformation, including cloud, AI, and ML, impacted biotech and pharma? And the vulnerability attacks or cyber attacks? And what are the benefits and risks associated with increased investment in cloud technology for large pharmaceutical organizations? And I know it says large. It's also about the small and well, small, mid, and large. What are the investments you should be making to kind of mitigate the risk you may have for your operations? And I always like to jump in and saying, why do you care? We kind of hit on it. Most of these companies are working within the area of personal information, PHI, may have some HIPAA compliance, some compliance that they have to meet. We want to make sure that you guys have things in place to kind of deal with that. There's a lot of things with intellectual property. You're creating company-specific content that you don't want your competitors or anyone else to get access to. How do you protect that to make sure nobody's coming in and stealing that asset from you? So those are some things that we feel why we put this together, why you should care about what's going on, especially when everybody has this buzzword of cyber all the time. You know, why is that important to you? So who we are, why should you even listen to us? And what do we have to say? Well, I'm Wayne Roy. I'm the CEO of Troynet. And Troynet is a technology firm that works within the pharma and the biotech industry. We help companies make the right operating decisions around technology, whether it's short-term or long-term IT initiatives or even cybersecurity. We'll help you out and figure out, are you doing the right things and are you making the right decisions for your company on the technical side? Eric, if you can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Wayne. I'm the CIO of Couch Braunstorff. We've had a nearly 20-year career in technology and especially with a focus on insurance. And we've been developing our cyber liability practice at Couch Braunstorff Insurance Group over the past 4 years as we see those cyber risks become more impactful in the overall business, especially as it relates to biotech and pharma companies. So happy to join Wayne on this particular discussion.
Excellent. And also like to go into why we're doing this, because if you understand our motivation, you'll see why it's of value to you. There's a saying that says, people remember not for what you take from them, but what you give to them. And we realize that we're not in the business of technology or insurance. We're in the business of helping companies, because if we make you successful, then you're successful. So we decided to get together and give back to the community that gave to us. So we're putting together content that we freely want to give you on advice and ideas and directions. And please treat us as a resource. If you have any questions, at the end, we're going to have our emails. Shoot us your questions. I mean, there's no obligation. We're here to truly give back to the community and give advice, because we see a lot of people not knowing the right things to do or understanding what this stuff really means. And they're going in the wrong direction and spending a ton of money on the wrong things. So with that said, Eric, let's jump on in. I'm going to let you run and go with it. Start off, Eric.
Sure, Wayne. Yeah, I think the first topic that I had on my agenda today was really how has the nature and the frequency of cyber attacks evolved in this particular industry as it relates to biotech and pharmaceuticals. And frankly, this is a particular practice area for us just because of our geographic area. There's a ton of biotech startups at various stages. There's a ton of pharmaceutical companies in the area around our office here in New Jersey. And we've helped a lot of them along their journey, whether they're really early stage de novo startup firms, whether they've gotten some seed funding, maybe into a stage where they're in real growth mode, or whether they're gearing up EBITDA and moving towards a sale. We participate in all parts of their business as a risk management partner. And what we've seen as it relates to cyber attacks in that particular space is since 2019, it really seems as though the nature of the attacks has developed in a way that for me, as looking at it from a claims perspective, we've seen exponential growth in terms of claims since the outset of COVID. And largely that comes from the new risk paradigm, right? Lots of folks working from home. So the old concept of a firm having physical security around their office of operations and their local IT starts to break down. And now the underwriting focus, at least from a cyber liability insurance perspective, is more upon, do you have mobile device management? Do you have multi-factor authentication? Do you have good encryption, good backups, and good training? And we'll get into a little bit more of that as we go on. But we've seen a really significant uptick in the claims development that's happened since 2019, especially in the area of ransomware and in certain claims that stem out of business interruption, right? So I'm sure you guys have heard of the MGM breach and the ransomware that happened to them. I know that's outside of biotech and pharmaceutical and healthcare in general, but very large breach. It just happened about a month and a half ago.
Eric, I got a question for you. In these instances, do you have an average cost? I know that's a hard thing to quantify because it's across a broad breadth, but do you have an idea of, some of the cost that these
Absolutely.
guys,
so
some of them I hear is just phenomenal.
Yeah, so it's a function of a few things, right? So if you think of the typical data breach related costs as a function of how many records that the company has in its care, custody, and control of customer information, right? And usually those records are stratified by the types of information. So you'll have PII, which is personally identifiable information. You'll have some PHI, which is personal health information. You'll have some PCI, which is payment card information or personal financial information. And so depending on the types of data that your company has for its customers or partners or its employees, there's different costs associated with that types of data. But just for instance, I'll give you an example. If a company has about 10,000 records, and it's just PII and maybe some PHI data, because we're talking about the biotech and pharmaceutical industries, you're looking at a records, a third-party breach cost of probably in the realm of $5 to $6 million on an average breach. What's happening more and more is the business interruption component. Whereas if you have a ransomware attack and your systems are down and you're not able to conduct business for a period of time, we've seen a number of companies that have had cyber attacks and really haven't been able to access any of their systems for a few months. And that certainly impacts operations, it impacts profitability, it impacts revenue. And so the many claims coming out of that sort of thing can range between 1 to 3 months worth of actual revenue, right?
Brian, can you mute that person, please?
Yeah, doing it now. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, the direct answer, Wayne, is it's quite a range, right? There's obviously for smaller firms, startup firms, they won't have as much exposure. For firms that have 10, 15, 20,000 records, it grows significantly. The other component here related to funds transfer fraud, if you're thinking about biotech and pharmaceutical firms that are in the stage of growth where they have some venture funding, and they have access to that capital in their bank accounts, they become targets for funds transfer fraud. And because of that, if they have a lot of money sitting in bank accounts or on the balance sheet, there's an exposure there, right? So it's largely dependent on the type of business, but we've seen claims happen that we imagine to be with little firms, so, smaller firms that were $1 million claims. And we've seen a couple claims come across recently that are on the order of $5 to $7 million.
Do you see things primarily for intellectual property? Is it more ransomware where they lock them out and they have to pay for it, or do you have to actually seen where they've stole data and put on the market to sell to the highest bidder?
Yeah, there's a couple interesting perspectives on that. There's many cyber insurance policies have a provision that provides for a reputational harm endorsement. So essentially what it means is if there was an event and then there was published articles that negatively impacted the future earnings of the firm, there's coverage there for that sort of thing. And in the case of the intellectual property that a firm is accumulating over time, there's certainly an objective to keep that intellectual property close to the vest, as confidential as possible, and keep it as part of the firm's trade secrets. There's not as many of those attacks because of the sophistication of the information that's there. There's probably a limited marketplace for buyers of that stolen information. But we have started to see, with the advent of large language models and things like ChatGPT. I was reading an article the other day that if you're a cyber criminal and you're not using an LLM to do your work, you're not doing your job, right? So
for the clarification, can you tell what LLM is?
Yeah, so ChatGPT is a large language model, right? And so what it's at its very core, it's been trained to understand how to speak English and how to think, essentially. And there are varying degrees of sophistication for large language models, or LLMs. But at the rate it's moving, I can just see the future a little bit. I'm betting that we're going to have a a rash of inbound phishing emails, a rash of inbound types of attacks that are really going to test our users' training, because they're going to be so specific and so good, they're going to be hard to prevent.
To sum it up for everybody, because I've been doing some labs and some table talks on that subject, and what's happening now is you don't have to know anything. You really don't have to know programming. You really don't have to know the ins and outs of networks and how to do hacking. What you do have to have the ability to do is go on Google, go to the right site, and you can purchase from somebody that's smart a tool that allow you to now go in. And what AI do is artificial intelligence. It's now incorporating the smart learning models to actually do the work for somebody that's thinking. So you can go online right now and go to the dark web. You can actually purchase these tools and run them, and they'll do a phenomenal job of running campaigns. So if you have somebody that you want to target, and I have a pharmaceutical company I want to target, I can buy that kit and run that against their organization, and it'll find ways in infiltrating that organization.
And Wayne, you're referring to hackers that want to get into those organizations, right?
Yep.
So those tools are pretty widely available.
Yep.
That
But there's also run phishing campaigns as well. So you have ones that do campaigns as well as hacking itself, where it actually look at ports that's open, but you actually can run, because there's two areas, and I know we're going to go into it, where my heart feels where most of the hackers are coming, social engineering.
Yeah.
That's really where the attack is. That's why it's important for us to really have these dialogues, because a lot of C-levels go, my IT is good, because they're talking routers, they're talking AV, they're talking, we have these protocols in place. But what needs to be in place is policies and procedures for the organization, because how do you control what people do? You know, right. I can have the best car in the world, doesn't mean I control how my son drives that car. Okay.
Yeah. And the advent of AI and the continued machine learning as it relates to these cyber attacks has, in my eyes, reset the landscape for risk. So if you in the past hadn't been training your users to spot phishing emails and just relied on the controls and the software to prevent some of those attacks, the attacks are going to get so good, and they're already almost there, that they'll be imperceptible when it comes to the actual employee in the seat seeing that email come in, and it's going to look so good and have this air of legitimacy about it. I just hope that these firms are really being cautious of that in terms of how they train their staff to be diligent.
And if you don't mind, I want to go into policies, procedures, and controls, because I want to be able to have the C-levels understand that's what they should be looking at, but also understand the definition of things. If you don't mind me going through it, policies are, hey, this is what my rules for my organizations. Procedures are, how am I going to go about doing those things? And controls are what IT does. Controls are things where I can lock down. An MFA is a control. Antivirus is a control. A specific configuration that prevents you from doing something, that's control. That's IT, and a lot of organizations spend a lot of time telling IT to do these controls, but truthfully, policies and procedures is what you take to court. And C-level need to understand they need to have a serious involvement in the policies, procedures, because that dictates the controls are in place. There's too much focus on controls. As well as from the insurance side, I know you can speak on that. When an insurance company gives you those audits and questionnaires, they didn't come in and look at your environment. They ask you questions, and those questions relate to your procedures and policies for your organization. That's what you prove that you've done best practices and due diligence. Those are the areas, if I am going to advise a company, where you should have the most dialogue. Because if you have a breach and you now have to go to court, they're going to ask you, what's your incident response plan? And that's going to break down how you do things. Those are your procedures. What's your policy for incident response? That'll tell you, you know what, our company believes in this, and this is what you should expect if this happens. that's what you bring to court. You're not going to bring your subscription of, whatever antivirus and show it to the judge. They're not going to look at that. It's your policies and procedures. So really looking at an organization and thinking through what's your risk tolerance and what's your risk level, and writing that down and documenting what's your posture going to be for your security. Because those are things now, if you have a phenomenal policy, procedure, and controls, when we go into the area of cyber insurance, that's what insurance companies are looking for. And if you have a phenomenal plan in place, and correct me if I'm correct, Eric, your policy is more marketable, and you have a better chance of getting a better price point on your policy, as well as you get more coverage. And hopefully, before you get off the line, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about coverage as well, because I think a lot of people have cyber insurance and they don't realize that there's different policies. Simple things like, okay, are they supplying with legal advice if something happens? That should be part of your policy, because your instant response plan is you're going to speak to your IT team, you're going to speak to your instant response team, you're going to call your carrier. Okay, that's part of your instant response. Your carrier is high up because you don't want to make changes before you speak to your carrier, because they may have a process in place where they need to see some so they can cover that breach. Am I correct with that?
Right. Oh, yeah. And we can, now that we're on that topic, I mean, if we think about, we've talked a lot about various cyber risks, right? So we've talked about the social engineering type risks that are out there. We've talked about ransomware, we're all aware of just good old fashioned hacking and exploiting vulnerabilities, but the so what of it when a breach happens, what do? Right? So that incident response plan is something that you should have a tabletop exercise to actually go through and say, well, what if we lost access to this system and it was breached, and for whatever reason we didn't have good backups? How would we, number one, recover that? And then how would we go about identifying what information might have been taken, and then take steps to follow the various regulatory compliance steps that we need, as well as the forensic IT stuff. So, in the event of a breach, you're going to want to contact your insurance provider. They're going to provide you with a breach coach or an incident response coach. They're going to provide you with a law firm. They're also going to provide you with some forensic IT support. The breach folks are going to establish, like the breach coach folks are going to establish what needs to be done to remove any particular infection, stabilize systems, get things back online in a secure manner, and then bring in the forensic IT folks to better understand exactly what data may have been taken. The interesting caveat here is because there have been more ransomware type attacks, and that continues to flourish largely on the back of like a crypto locker or some sort of variant of that. Let's hope that everyone here on this call has good backups and doesn't need to consider paying the ransom. But if they don't, and there's critical information that wasn't backed up and they need to find a way to restore it, your breach coach, as part of your insurance policy, will work through the process and probably loop in the FBI or whatever relevant regulatory or enforcement organization, if you are going to end up paying that ransom, because there's methods to help you recover some of the ransom that's paid, or help actually the insurance company, if there's coverage there, to provide the ransom payment. They'll be able to recover it if it's done in the appropriate way. So it's really an exercise in, while things are very chaotic, stopping to slow down a little bit, involve the appropriate resources that are afforded to you from your cyber insurance policy, and then craft a plan for a very pragmatic set of next steps.
But some of the things I think about, Eric, sorry, when you
Please.
talk about insurance, which I think is important for people to really dig into. A lot of people don't understand what really is covered by that cyber insurance. Things like legal. Things you need to consider is you need to get legal advice because you may have to go public with it. You may have to talk to the media, and you need to go, prior to you doing anything, you should be talking to the insurance carrier. They should be providing you, if you have the proper policy, and that's where you come in, Eric, a proper policy that does, because not all of them do, supply these additional things where, hey, you do have coverage that offers legal advice and forensic, because that legal advice is say, hey, do I speak to the media? And what do I say? Do I make it public?
Right.
And what do I make public?
Right.
Also on the policy, I see a lot of people not asking the question about, when do I get paid? If I do have a breach, I have a time frame that, hey, I may be down. Is my insurance carrier going to pay me in a day, in 10 days, in 1 year? When are they going to give me the money? Or do I have to go out of pocket, fix everything, and hope to get? So listen, if it's going to cost me $100,000 to get this done, do I have $100,000 to throw in right now to resolve it, waiting for the carrier to pay me 90, because sometimes they're like the government, 120 days later? You know, that's part of your policy that you need to really have somebody that understands insurance to look at those things and say, you know what, when is my policy going to pay out? Hey, if I get sued by a third party they're not direct, but they were affected by the breach that happened by my, am I covered for that? These are some of the items that I know from my experience. I'm not an insurance person, but this is my experience from working with people and being part of the security side of it. That third party says, because of your action, you affected me. Will my policy cover that third party? These are things that I think is important, especially in healthcare. We didn't harp heavily on why it's important for pharma, but I'll jump into that real quick. The reason why we're really doing this and why it's so important for biotech and pharma and anybody in healthcare, you guys are a big target. Do you know why? Because unfortunately, healthcare has been slow on upgrading and adopting new technology and actually bringing their equipment up to speed. And the ones that have still are a big target because that's where the money is. If I can infiltrate a healthcare practice or a pharmaceutical company, or even if I can infiltrate their vendors and from there jump off to get into their organization, I have records. And you know what's valuable? Healthcare information, social security numbers, birth dates, because that's everything. When you go to any health practice, what's the first thing I ask you? What's your birthday? I can't even give them my name. They don't believe my name, but they want to know my date of birth.
And what's your social?
My insurance, and they even ask my social security numbers. They realize there's tons of value in that. They can take that data and they can resell. I've heard stories of people getting other people's personal information, and somebody from another country would fly in, go to a doctor, get the medical go off of that plan and get taken care of by a physician, fly back out, and that's on that other person's medical plan. So it's big money for pharmaceuticals, big money for healthcare. That's why it's such a big target for them. They're not targeting somebody with a restaurant. That's just PII. That's not big bucks. Big bucks is the data that you guys have. That's why it's a big target. That's why we're doing this. So I really wanted to emphasize that we're not trying to be doom and gloom. We have to be practical on the type of industry in and why there's a value for them to go after you. Sorry, I got on a bit of a rant on that because I need to
Wayne, go on. No, I
why
love
that's important.
I love it. You know, and generally, because of many of the biotech firms, especially in the area of New Jersey here, that are largely research-based, exploratory, many are startups, they have a tremendous financial possibility or financial impact of a breach, right? On not only on their reputation. For instance, like if you're talking about a very large firm like Pfizer, if Pfizer has a breach, it's not going to put them out of business, right? They're much more resilient than some of these small teams and startups. But if a pre-trial biotech startup has a breach or a business interruption issue due to a cyber event, yeah, it can very well put them out of business, especially if they have not been careful about reviewing their cyber insurance policy. And they may have thought that the cyber limits that are given to them on their business owner's policy were sufficient at $50,000 in coverage. And when the $1.5 million claim comes down the line, they're only provided $50,000 in coverage, and the rest they have to pull out of pocket, right?
Yep.
So they're if you're not carefully reviewing that policy, you're choosing to self-insure it.
Pretty much. And the issue with them is it's not only about, hey, if you have to pay, but also brand. If you depend on your brand and your brand now has to go public that this happened, your reputation kind of goes south. And that's a dollar amount to your organization. That could kill organization as well. The larger companies have a big full marketing team to kind of, spin something else, but you're a small organization. You can't afford to spin that to your benefit. Somebody will say, why would I use that brand? People don't realize your brand is what you sell. And if that gets a black eye, that could actually close your business out if you're not careful.
So Wayne, could you talk a little bit about some of the preventative measures that that ownership, boards, C-levels can take to mitigate some of the risks of cyber attacks? What are the layers of controls that are especially important for these firms?
I'm not going to go into the technical, but I'm going to, since we're talking to C-levels, I'm going to be as frank as possible. The biggest threat to an organization is C-level. And I'm going to say why. I'm going to speak as frankly as possible. If the buy-in is not from the top of being secure and having your business healthy from the top, it will always fail. Do you know the person that has the most administrative access? The C-level, because nobody can tell them no. So they have to believe that, security starts from me. I have to be the guy that my access to things are limited, no matter what my role is. Because if I'm telling the person all the way down to the janitor that he has to be security conscious, I have to be the top layer, be an exemplar for what security is. That's the biggest gap we see is C-level that have too much access to things or not following protocols or clicking on links because, again, nobody can tell them no. Getting them in a line and having it come from the top down, that's the first step to security. The second
So Wayne,
step,
let's assume that the C-level is on board. They bought into security. It's part of the organization. It's in the fabric, right?
okay.
So what is that? If I'm a CEO, CFO of a pharma company, what are the critical things that I'm making sure that my IT folks and my staff are doing in terms of training and controls?
First thing, everybody has to have MFA enabled. Multi-factor authentication is a simple thing, but one of the most effective things to have across the board for anything they log into is two-factor authentication and MFA. The second thing is training. A lot of companies have subscription, and if everybody doesn't have it, you better get it now for some type of cybersecurity training. The issue is it's something that has to be managed. You don't turn it on and let it go. You have to really enforce it as part of the culture for the organization because the biggest threat to you is an employee clicking on something that they're not supposed to.
And to that point, Wayne, do you see specifically phishing testing being effective? So like using the Microsoft stack, if you're already in Office 365 and you subscribe to the I can't remember the license for the life of me, but it allows you to do some phishing testing.
That's Azure P2.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Like KnowBe4 and some of the phishing testing outfits do you find that to be effective with your clients?
They're effective if they're managed. We actually manage those things for most of the organization we're involved with because people that do have it, they turn it on and they don't spend the time. It's a tool, but you have to read the analytics, you have to see the trends, and you have to be able to tweak it and be able to adjust. Because people may not be engaged in the videos, they just may be clicking through, because it's paramount for training. That I feel is one of the top things you can do, is make sure everybody's on board to having good hygiene when it comes to security. And that's
And you
definitely
gotta talk to your people too, right? You know, we had experience with a client that asked us to do a phishing test, and we did that. We delivered the feedback, and I had a note to check in and see how their conversations went to some of the people that had not passed the phishing test and actually clicked on the link and entered their credentials. And they didn't close the loop with them. They didn't talk to them because they found it to be kind of an awkward conversation to have, right? And so we coached them on it. They were able to have that discussion with those folks, and those folks got better, right? You know, nobody wants to fall victim to this sort of thing. And it's one of those ideas of, you know, the more you know, the more you test for it, the better you get. And as the risks are rising, so do our defenses have to be, right? We have to get better training, better, more attuned staff, and the existing staff that are out there that are working on these computers on a daily basis can be better, right? And they want to be better. And in many cases, they just don't know how, right? So closing the loop with them and helping them improve is particularly important.
what we found with the training side of it, incorporating third party with HR, because third party, they'll open up to somebody that's third party a little quicker than the manager. Don't have the manager go to the person. HR is involved because that's also employee resources. You want them in that conversation with them as well. This way the employee takes it seriously. But having those two, HR and a third party management company, and managing the training, so you have somebody coming in and say, hey, how was it? They'll say something more than if my manager comes to me and said, did you do it? I'm going to go, yeah. And I'm not going to say if I had any problems. We found those two mix, but definitely HR internally, and highly suggesting a third party management of the training. It works the best. We see the best results, and you see the most engagement, and you get the feedback, because people don't like to talk to their higher ups because they don't want to look bad and don't want to look like they dropped the ball. And sometimes they feel like they're being watched.
Wayne, you mentioned a couple of things on controls that I really liked. Talked about training, talked about MFA, talked about testing users. I cut you off before you got to backups and software restricted policies. Can you talk a little bit about that stuff?
Well, backups is a must. Backup is one of the most important things you can have, because if you get it's backup is paramount to security. That should be part of your security practice, because if something happens and you have to be able to get the data back, then nobody holds you ransom.
That's
There's
right.
Was that?
That's right. That's right.
Nobody holds you ransom. So you need to. Backup is very important. What people do not do is they think they have a backup, but they never spend time to verify they have a backup. Do not.
So how would you talk, Wayne, to how would you interact with a CEO, CFO that says, hey, I have backups, my IT guy's great, and everything's wonderful. Would you ask that CFO, all right, could you restore your would you challenge them to restore a file that they deleted like 5 months ago?
Definitely. Yes. Right. Because the proof is important, because I've been to so many engagements, we've been pulled in where we had to come now behind somebody else because they could not get their data back.
Yep.
And we had to go figure out how can we do this, or you know what, they just have to pay the ransom, because we see that, hey, the backups, nobody's perfect. I've seen instances where, you know what, everybody tried to do all the right things, but because something was not checked, they went back, the backup's not there. You should, at minimum, once a year, do a restore for all your critical. Pick little action points, do a restore, and physically see that that thing is there and restored.
Yeah,
that's minimum.
Some of us are a little crazier than once a year, right?
I was giving a minute because sometimes you gotta hope you get that much from people. I'd like to see quarterly.
Yeah.
Okay, because you have it'll notify it is completed, and do quarterly. Do a hey, I want to see restore, and I want proof to go to sea level that these restores actually were mounted and work. And another thing with backup is people need to understand how long will it take to restore something. Say I have a company, you know what? Every minute I'm in finance, and every minute I'm down, that's $1 million. Great, you have a backup, but if it takes you 2 days to get that thing back up,
Right.
how much money have you lost? You also should know how far back you can get and how quickly you can get it. Those are two things you should be able to answer when somebody asks. If you're sea level, you should be able to answer those two things, so you know.
Right.
Okay, and there's one more item that we didn't touch on that says as paramount for every organization should be doing is doing vulnerability assessments, running those, whether it's twice a year, once a year. I prefer quarterly, but that's me. I'm a paranoid person. The price on those things is dropped. I'm not asking for a full pen, but you should be running vulnerability assessments so you can gauge. It's almost like going to the doctor and getting your blood check. How can somebody diagnose you if they haven't looked at anything? You should be having somebody come and do a vulnerability assessment. That'll gauge where you are and what needs to be fixed. Every company should be doing it. At minimum, I'd prefer biannually or even quarterly, because right now I believe insurance, if I'm not mistaken, is now going to make a requirement for vulnerability management, correct? That's coming down the pipe?
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming, right? So the last 2 years, there's been a big push, 2.5 years actually, there's been a big push towards MFA. And carriers have gotten that under their belt. And now they're starting to really focus on other areas of that cyber liability application that they haven't particularly drilled down on in the past. You know, one of those is some sort of penetration test, some sort of vulnerability assessment. In the meantime, what they've done is if you are not regularly patching your systems, there's decreasing coverages involved. So let's say that you had a particular cyber event that impacted a Windows Server 2016 instance, and because of that, there was ultimately a breach, and that system hadn't been patched with a known vulnerability in 6 months. That carrier could cut your limit of payment in half, based on the terms of the policy you agreed to. So, and if it's a known vulnerability that's gone beyond a year, they may not offer coverage at all. So certainly a place where making sure that systems are patched is of utmost importance.
I agree with you, and you would think it's easy and it's done across the board, but we've come to quite a few engagements where, because the IT load is so hard for internal IT team, they need the help for somebody to come in and handle those patch management. So I really feel that people should really jump on it. It's something that can mitigate a lot of issues, because I've gone into engagement where I found servers that had 2 or 3 years back where they don't have the right security patches. I'm looking at a Tomcat server right now that needs to be upgraded because we did a pen test on it. Come to find out it had an old version on it. It's just simple things that can be done, but sometimes the IT workload is so heavy for an organization, they don't know who to turn to, and sometimes they need third-party help to come in and help those things, because patching is something that we see is becoming a challenge for a lot of organizations. But Brian, Brian, I think we're up on a time. So Eric, I think we're like over our time here. I don't want to beat it at horse. We had a good conversation on it, and we're looking to come back and do some more. Did you have any last thoughts?
No, this has been great, Wayne. This is great.
So
thank you.
I'm dropping in here for everybody. I mean, I appreciate everybody jumping on. Both Eric and I's context there. We're going to be doing some more tabletop talks around the topic of cyber, around insurance, around operational risk. We're also, anybody that's on this, if you shoot me an email and you're interested in instant response report plan, and we have a template that I can share. This is only a template. You have to adjust yourself to fit your organization, but I can give you a starting template and a policy around incident response. And also, if you want to go to troynet.com/cyber insurance assessment, we're offering a cyber insurance assessment. So we kind of run an assessment to get your idea of where you sit and with some of the gaps when it comes to meeting the insurance compliance. And this is not, hey, you're making a NIST or SIST, this is specific to insurance. Are you checking the boxes you need to make sure when you go to a carrier, what you're asking for is viable and you're marketable in the insurance market? With that being said, Eric, thank you. I appreciate you being involved. And guys, you have a good one. Take care.
All right, thank you. Take care.
All right, Brian, wrap that up.
Thank you. Take care.